Right, good morning, everybody. We're going to make a start. Welcome to the first meeting of the Constitution and Governance Committee for the 2025-26 municipal year. In accordance with the Council's Constitution, I will be dealing with the election of Chairman of the committee. The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. I've had apologies from Councillor Shopak, who's being substituted by Councillor Kenny, Councillor Cole, whose substitute today is Councillor Jenkin, Councillor Garrigan, who's being substituted by Councillor Candy, and Councillor Black, who's being substituted by Councillor O'Connor. The next item on the agenda is election of chairman. In accordance with paragraph 16.6 of the Council Procedure Rules, if there are more than 2 people nominated for any position to be filled and there is not a clear majority of votes in favour of one person, then the name of the person with the least number of votes will be taken off the list and a new vote taken. The process will continue until there is a clear majority of votes for one person. I will now call for nominations for the election of chairman. Each nomination will need a seconder. Please, can I have your nominations? Councillor Rouse.
Thank you, Angela. I would like to propose Councillor Dick Cole as Chairman of Constitution and Governance Committee. I have known Councillor Cole for over a decade now and worked with him on Cornwall Council for the last 8. Councillor Cole is the epitome of what a Cornwall councillor should be. Dedicated, committed, hardworking, trustworthy, and a real advocate for his residents and the rest of Cornwall. One area that has always been important to Councillor Cole is how Cornwall Council operates. Our governance, our constitution, how we make decisions on behalf of those that sent us here, but doing so lawfully and in accordance with the Constitution. And I'm not saying Councillor Cole is a stickler for the rules, but he's progressive and always keen to move the council forward, defensive of the system that we operate within at the same time. I've worked with Dick when he was Vice Chairman of the Electoral Review Panel back in 2017 to 2021, which was an arm's length of C&G, which saw us review all of Cornwall Council's divisions in Cornwall, boldly reducing the total number of councillors from 123 to 87, attending community engagement events in every corner of Cornwall. Councillor Cole was also part of the Community Governance Review that reviewed all of the parish and town council arrangements in Cornwall too. In the last 4 years, I've worked closely with Councillor Cole in my capacity as Vice Chairman of the Council and he as a group leader, particularly on the scrutiny review that I oversaw. I've also served under his chairmanship for the last 4 years on the Cornwall Minority Status Working Group, where he has done a sterling job. So for that reason, Angela, I am delighted to be proposing Councillor Cole as Chairman of C&G today. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a seconder. Councillor Kenny. Are there any other nominations?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Kevin's.
Excuse me, can I just ask you to say all of that using your microphone? We've just had a message saying that people can't hear online. So would you mind repeating yourself? Sorry, Councillor Parsonage.
You'll remember it. So Kevin joined Reform UK some time ago and was a member of the council as Reform UK and as a Conservative. He serves on the shadow cabinet and has acted as a mentor to many of our candidates, now councillors. With his background on all the procedures and processes, I believe that Kevin would do an outstanding job as the chair.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor O'Connor. I have nominations for Councillor Cole and Councillor Towell to be elected as Chairman of the Constitution and Governance Committee. I will therefore call each member's name and you should confirm the name of your preferred candidate or whether you abstain. This will not be recorded in the minutes. It's purely to ensure the will of the committee is accurately recorded. So, Councillor O'Connor. Actually, can I, sorry, I'll start again. So can I have, this is for Councillor Cole, first of all. Yeah. No, because I've got to take down.
So,
yeah.
So members, if Angela's going to call your name, you just say whether you are supportive of either Councillor Cole, Councillor Towell, or you're abstaining, and that's just so that we've got the will of the committee recorded. And if you could please put your microphone on so that everyone can hear what you're saying, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you. Councillor Towell for me, please.
Thank you. Councillor Kenny.
Councillor. Now, Councillor Cole.
Okay. Councillor Jenkin. Yeah, Councillor Jenkin.
Councillor Cole.
Councillor Dennis.
Councillor Cole.
Councillor Candy.
Councillor Cole.
Councillor Parsonage.
Councillor Towell.
Councillor Rouse.
Councillor Cole.
Councillor Thomas.
Councillor Cole.
Councillor Towell.
Councillor Towell.
Okay, I'll just count that up. 1, 2. I can confirm that the voting is as follows: 3 votes for Councillor Towell and 6 votes for Councillor Cole. So I declare Councillor Cole the chairman of the committee. As Councillor Cole is absent, I'll also deal with the voting for vice chair. So could I have nominations, please? Councillor Jenkin.
Yes, I'm privileged to be able to nominate Councillor Rouse as Vice Chair of the committee. As we all know, he's been done a sterling job as Vice Chair of the full council, and therefore has a huge understanding of the constitutional processes and ways that the council works, and has been a member of this committee for a while. So I think he will be a sterling support for Councillor Cole and be able to, and between them, they will be able to drive this committee forward.
Do we have a second?
Yes, I'm happy to second that. Outstanding ability to recognise people in the chamber, but even when there's plenty of Thomases around. Thank you.
Have we got any other nominations for vice chairman? No, in that case, I'll go through the same routine as. Yeah, we can do show of hands for one, yes. So those in favour of Councillor Rouse being vice chairman? That's unanimous.
Thank you, members. Thank you. And straight in the hot seat. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride, as I've come to learn over the last few years. Right. Thank you, Angela, for taking the meeting so far. Moving on, members, to item number 4, declarations of interest, please. Do we have any? Raise your hand if we do. No, we don't. That's great. Moving on to agenda item number 5, minutes of the meeting held on 6th of March 2025. I know the majority of us weren't here at that point then, but we can still vote in favour of this and support it if we feel able to. Any comments on the minutes from the previous meeting, please? Great. Yeah, Yeah, Councillor
I
Jenkins.
was just going to say, because a lot of us weren't here, all the recommendations have been taken forward as far as I understand it. So I think we should be quite happy with the minutes.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Councillor Jenkins. All those for? Thank
I'm
you.
happy to second.
Thank you. We've got a proposal from Councillor Thomas, seconded from Councillor Jenkins. All those for, please, members. It's unanimous. Thank you. Agenda item number 6, Committee Work Programme 2025-2026. This is in pages 9 to 18 of your agenda packs, members. And I'm going to bring in Anita, if I may, please, just to talk us through the context. Please, Anita, and then talk us through the work programme. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, Vice Chairman. Before you today, members, is the draft work programme for the committee. You'll have seen in the report that there are a number of annual requirements for this committee to consider as a part of its work. So the member development plan, the review of operation of call-in and urgency provisions, and the review of the overview and scrutiny protocol. There are a number of matters included that were raised by members in the previous council, such as the operation of substitute provisions and the review of the protocol relating to the governance of the council's companies. We've also got some new items, so one of which is the monitoring officer is going to present shortly on the governance review. There are also a number of unscheduled items from the previous council where we are awaiting legislation. That includes the government announcement last week when they confirmed that they will be making legislation about remote meetings and proxy voting. So at some point, once that legislation is made, this will need to come through this committee in terms of how that works in practice and any review to the procedure rules that are required. There's also a consultation, as some members will know, currently on the reform of planning committees. So once that works through the process, you can expect that this committee will be considering looking at that and how that might impact on the governance arrangements of the council. There's an opportunity for you today to make further suggestions. What I would say is that the work programme is a living document, and you will appreciate that due to changes during the year, such as the ones I've referred to about legislation, that might mean that items move up and down the work programme. As in previous administrations, there's an amendment. The recommendation is for you to consider and approve today, subject to any amendments you might have, but also in terms of amendments going forward, a delegation to the chairman of the committee in consultation with the vice chairman, monitoring officer, and myself to make any changes that are required, which might arise from changes to legislation. It might arise from motions to council, which might be referred here. There's a whole raft of reasons why changes to the work programme might result. And then once those changes are considered, the practice is that the wider committee is notified as soon as those changes are made, so that you're aware of what the items are that are coming up. I'd just also like to say that in considering its work programme and the items on the work programme, there is a considerable amount of consultation that takes place to inform reports. So we will consult with group leaders, we will consult with relevant committee members. We also do benchmarking with other councils and expert bodies such as the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny to make sure that when recommendations are presented to you, they are as well rounded as they can be. I will leave it there, Chairman. So it's a matter now for the committee. Happy to take any questions, and of course any further suggestions that might want to be considered for inclusion in the work programme. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita, for presenting that. Members, you'll see we've got 2 recommendations on page 9 of our papers. Looking at the work programme is not a fait accompli. There are gaps in it, which is always healthy. So I'll now take comments on the work programme, please. Councillor Thomas.
This is a question to Anita and what she just went through. In terms of benchmarking from other councils, can you say a little bit about the criteria that's used to choose or select those councils, and what methodology is used to disperse the information and to critically analyse whether it is relevant to Cornwall Council?
Anita.
Thank you. So I'm part of an organisation called the Association of Democratic Services Officers. So we have a very active community. So we will consult. There's an active consultation going on about all sorts of matters, and we all feed into one another. To be fair, quite often Cornwall is looked at as best practice for a lot of these things because we are quite often ahead of the game on a lot of things. But obviously when we're looking at benchmarking, we take account of all the consultation responses, but we do need to look at our comparators. So we look at Wiltshire because Wiltshire became a unitary at the same time as us. So did Durham. There are a number of we look at the size and the population, the size of committees, etc. But if we can learn from best practice from others, we will, irrespective of the size of the council. Similarly, Paul, the monitoring officer, and Leah, who also supports this committee, who you'll come across, there's lawyers in local government forum as well. So we've got those fora that we use, and it's healthy, obviously, to learn from other councils. I hope that answers your question, Councillor Thomas.
Councillor Thomas.
If I may come back, thank you very much. Cumbria used to be used as a key county area that we would be compared with as a peer authority, and that was the one at the top of the list. Is it still at the top of the list, or has Wiltshire taken over?
Anita.
So we will, if we do consult with Cumbria. I think Cumbria, I might be wrong, Paul may know better than I have a feeling that Cumbria might be now a combined authority. So it wouldn't be a comparator in the same way as it once was.
Thank you. I'm going to bring the monitoring officer in. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Mitten da. Good to see you. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you. Just a short point on what Anita was saying is Cumbria has been reorganised, I believe, into two unitaries. So essentially, the geography's been split. I can't remember the exact names of the two constituent authorities that were part of Cumbria, but it's now been reorganised. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Towell.
Thank you. Anita mentioned that there was a review of substitutes that have been muted. Just wondering about the rationale behind that. What are the current problems with substitutes? And because to my mind, the system works quite well at the moment. So I'm just wondering what was the reason behind that.
Anita.
Thank you, Councillor Towell. So in the last administration, this committee looked at the provisions in relation to substitutes because there were we'd had some members who were a voting member and then wanted to join remotely, and it was causing confusion in terms of accountability. So this committee did some work. It was then recommended up to council, and council asked it to be looked at again, which is why it's come back to, which is why it will be coming back to this committee for a further review. Now, I recognise that I mentioned the changes in legislation about remote voting. If the remote voting comes into being before that substitute report is looked at, the substitute report may become null and void because that might provide some greater clarity in terms of the ability for members who join remotely to vote. But as it stands, the reason why it's on the work programme is because the full council referred it back here for a further consideration.
Thank you. Anita, just quickly on the remote voting, I saw the response to the consultation was launched last week, or the response was published. Can you just give us a quick inkling as to what direction that's going in?
Certainly, Chairman. So the government is minded to permit remote voting, but is suggesting that, is suggesting that it will be for local authorities to consider how that works in practice. It's also suggesting that proxy voting should be permitted, but in limited circumstances. So we will await the legislation, and much like we did with the temporary constitutional arrangements when we had the coronavirus, when we had to put everything remote, we will be going through a process with this committee to look at how that's enacted and the impact on our procedure rules.
Perfect. That's helpful. Thank you. Councillor Candy.
Yes, I'm only a substitute, so I may not be back when the item comes back on your agenda, or I may decide to attend anyway. But I think there is an issue of councillors who've had health issues, maybe have got COVID and don't want to give it to everyone else, electing having a substitute in the room, but then not being able to attend and only attend the webcast. It doesn't help their recovery in certain circumstances, and I will say, including mental health, that you can become a little bit engaged, but not fully. And I just would like to make sure that this committee looks at all those options at that time.
Important considerations. Thank you, Councillor Candy. Councillor Kenny.
Same subject, really. There's a difference between hybrid meetings and completely online meetings. I'm not terribly happy with hybrid ones. I think completely online meetings for certain meetings are perfectly appropriate. But will there be a differentiation, do you think?
So currently, if you are a voting member, you need to be in the room present and voting. We have got hybrid meeting technology here, which enables members who aren't voting to join remotely. The implication from the legislation looks like we will be looking at a hybrid solution whereby some members will be present in the room and some members might be remote and voting. On the proxy voting and some of the remote voting, some of the points that Councillor Candy has picked up in terms of being ill or having care commitments are the sorts of reasons why members might be looking at being able to vote remotely. But we'll obviously have to wait and see what the legislation says. Thank you.
Let's wait and see. Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Parsonage.
And just following up on the benchmarking, some of the councils are changing their dynamics as they move forward with other parties now leading some 10 councils. So that may change the ranking of who is best. No, never mind. Who is, what is the best model to follow. Also, with benchmarking I've done, going out to industry, and I believe you do, is key to driving through efficiencies and identifying new ways, new practices to take things forward so that we stay current with the way that other blue chip companies do it.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Parsonage. I don't think there's a question there, but Anita, you're welcome to come back in.
I'll make a comment because I will. But no, thank you for your comment. I think we always look at, so whenever we're looking at the benchmarking, the starting point has to be what does the legislation say? So we are bound by the local government legislation, whether that's Local Government Act 2000, the 1985 access to information provisions, those sorts of things. So we're always bound by the legislation. We will always look at how best to make systems operate and learn from best practice wherever that best practice might be. And sometimes we find there's a common voice on a particular issue, which makes us then think, right, well, this is obviously something we should be looking at. So yeah, we will learn from who we can learn from, basically, to make the situation, the council, the best it can be within the parameters of the legislation.
Thank you. Councillor Towell, then Councillor Jenkins. Councillor Towell.
I realise we're not at the end of the process yet, but getting your crystal ball out, is there provision at the moment within the draft legislation for authorities to completely opt out of remote voting?
I'm conscious of us going down a rabbit hole when it's not actually on the agenda for today, but I will take that last question on it. So Anita, would you mind just coming back in just quickly, please?
The implication from government is that there's not an opt-out. The implication is that they've listened to the consultation responses. They are seeking to enable remote voting and also proxy voting in certain circumstances. But the implication is that it will be a matter for local councils to see how it will operate for them. But I don't think there will be an option to opt out, not based on what I've seen thus far.
Thank you. Councillor Jenkins.
Just coming back to the work plan a bit, there are a lot of quite chunky things coming from government that are in the unscheduled list, including the standards, the Committee on Public Life that we're still waiting for what's coming out of that, as well as all the other bits. So I think probably having some gaps in the work plan is very sensible. And, I mean, having peer review and governance, which we're coming on to, that again is quite a chunky piece of work. So I think there's plenty of work already in the work plan. Councillor Thomas did mention the who dictates where people sit issue, which I presume at some point might need to come to
No,
this.
no,
We've dealt with it.
doubt.
Have you?
Sorted.
Yeah,
What, group leaders?
no, chief executive.
We've raised that, so we don't need to talk about it here, but
Right.
it will
Okay.
be raised. It will be,
Yeah.
it's addressed.
Yeah, I do think that sort of thing should be, permission, group leaders should be consulted before something like that comes in. And that's maybe a lesson to be learnt from this. But in terms of the work plan as it's laid out, it seems to me that it's got plenty in there, and obviously it will, we'll know the timescales a bit better fairly soon, but we can't judge exactly what they're going to be at this point. So, I'm happy to move the recommendations as set out if there's no.
Thank you. Proposal from Councillor Jenkins, seconded from Councillor Candy. We've got 2 recommendations on page 9. I'm going to take them both together. All those 4, please, members. Show of hands. Thank you. It's unanimous. Thank you very much, members. Moving on to agenda item number 7, governance review, pages 19 to 24 of your agenda packs. I'm going to bring in the monitoring officer, Paul, to present this agenda item, please. Over to you, please, Paul.
Thank you. And just to clarify, I can now hear the room. So if you do have any questions, I should be able to field those in due course. So I think the report is quite simple and self-explanatory, but I do have a few comments to make in opening. First of all, you'll see that it's a noting report because I'm essentially doing the governance review anyway, but I think it's really important for the Constitution and Governance Committee to be aware and to have heard from me at its first meeting of the municipal year that this is what I'm doing. Not least, it provides some context if there were to be proposed changes to the Constitution as to why those are coming forward through the governance review. There are a couple of reasons for the governance review which are set out in the report. Firstly, the council is intending to undergo a peer review from the Local Government Association at some point in the municipal year, and it's good practice to prepare for that by way of the self-assessment that they provide. That the work is underway with my deputy monitoring officer's support to look through the self-assessment and to judge where we are in terms of having all the various different blocks in place that you would expect with good governance. The other reason for wanting to do a governance review follows on from an audit committee discussion in relation to a particular audit in February, where the chief operating officer and myself committed to do a governance review, but it's also something that makes sense as we're both relatively new to the council, that we want to get a measure for how things work. So a lot of that will be covered within the self-assessment, and the initial work in checking through the self-assessment suggests that we have the building blocks in place. But I think what it can't do is say how governance actually operates and feels across the council. It's important to set the scope of what we're doing with the governance review so that it's achievable. Previous monitoring officers have started a governance review and not finished it because governance involves so much of the work that we do across my work as monitoring officer, but also within Anita's area. I've had a number of colleagues asking whether particular work or ideas could form part of the governance review, and I've been pushing back on the basis that there is still governance work to be done. And essentially, this doesn't mean that all governance work needs to form part of the governance review. So I believe the report sets out that we aren't covering scrutiny arrangements because those have previously been looked at externally with external support at cost. The review doesn't cover the council-owned entities as that part of the Constitution is being reviewed separately. and in a similar vein doesn't include financial regulations, because you may have seen from the work programme that those are coming forward separately, potentially at the next meeting of this committee. So from the discussions at the audit committee and my initial assessment through the self-assessment, it seems to me that the area of focus should really be around officer decision making, where the thresholds for officer decision making should sit. But also we have a great deal of assurance boards, checks and balances, which we go through as officers before reports are presented to members. And so we want to focus in on this particular area just to make sure that we've got the right assurance levels without being overly bureaucratic before we bring decisions through for formal decision making. And part of the initial discussions I've had with colleagues has really centred around the fact that they see officer decision making through boards, but it's actually an assurance process or a gateway onto a formal executive decision. So with that in mind, we're also looking at educating and promoting good governance across the council. So there's some work to be done on that, probably through training that I'll initiate. But also we understand there was a positive governance strategy that was launched some years ago, which may not have had the desired impact and effect across the officer cohort. And we're looking at refreshing that as part of this review. And Emma Williamson is in the room, and Emma's supporting me with the review so that we've got alignment between the legal and governance side of things, but also the strategy part of the council. So I hope that helps by way of context. I'm more than happy to take questions. I hope that's useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Just before I go to the membership, just a quick question from me, please, if you wouldn't mind clarifying, perhaps for Emma or for you, Paul. So great to see that the governance review is on our work programme for September. I see also in your executive summary it will work alongside the business plan and the peer review. Can you just confirm what timeline you're working towards, Paul? Will it be concluded before February and March 2026, or will it run alongside that? Thank you.
So the self-assessment, the way in which that will work is a substantial part of the governance review is that I have to finish that, but also present it to the Chief Executive and 151 officer. And I have regular meetings with the Chief Exec and 151 officer. So I'll be presenting that in draft at my next meeting with them, which I think is next week, if not the week after. And that will potentially throw other pieces of work to come forwards as part of the review. But it's important that we finish that self-assessment before the LGA come in. So I'm certainly looking to finish the self-assessment part of the work within the next month or so. And then in terms of the substantive parts of the governance review relating to officer decision making, what we want to have done is to have made some high level recommendations, again, because it's likely that those will be relating to simply officer decision making on boards. Those are recommendations that would probably be taken through the Chief Exec and 151 officer with a view to, do we change some of the board structures or look at how terms of reference might need to be amended. Again, that would need to bed in ideally before the LGA come into us. But one other key part of the work that we're looking to do is to do a survey across the officer management cohort to just check on understandings of governance so that we can see if there's other bits of work that we can do. So the substantive work with regards to the self-assessment and any changes to boards and officer decision-making structures would need to happen before the LGA come in. We don't quite know when the LGA will be in. Worst case scenario that they're in the fourth quarter of the year. That would mean that we've actually got more time to prepare and get work done. But if they came in the third quarter, we would certainly need to have the work well underway, if not completed by the end of the autumn. And it's useful, Councillor Rouse, that you've mentioned the work programme, because I think it's helpful probably for members to know that if there's nothing that's going to sort of change in terms of constitution, then I potentially won't be coming back to the committee in September with a further noting paper, because I don't want to waste the committee's time, but we might well deal with further updates informally for members, because noting papers aren't really what we want to be bringing to members in committees. We want to bring substantive reports with recommendations. So we'll keep you updated, but we may not need the next meeting in the diary. Thank you.
Thank you, Monitoring Officer. So we're on page 19 of your agenda pack. We've got one recommendation. Speakers have just started to come in. So I'm going to go to Councillor Thomas, Parsonage, then Kenny. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jordan, and thank you, Paul, for going through that. In terms of scrutiny, you made a quick reference to it. Obviously, the review and actions from took place prior to your arrival. I've got two questions or two observations. The first one is, what do you think of what has been achieved by the new scrutiny arrangements? Those members who are new to the committee won't necessarily be aware that things work slightly differently in the past. And I'd like to know how you think we have addressed the issue of scrutiny as we're talking about peer authorities, and from your own experience outside of Cornwall, how does our scrutiny measure up? Because I am of the opinion, before I get to my second question, that there are still issues that need to be addressed, but I'd be very interested in your view on how scrutiny is in Cornwall.
You, Councillor Thomas, Monitoring Officer.
Thank you. So, as I reflected, I'm still relatively new to the council, and I'm actually yet to attend a scrutiny meeting. So it's a bit difficult to answer that question in a huge amount of detail. I think it's clearly something that we have quite a well thought out process in terms of scrutiny, and we obviously have taken on board the recommendations that were made from our external partners, and I can only say that external body, Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, are experts in the field, and I think we're best advised to take those recommendations on and implement them. I think what I would say is that I do intend to get to scrutiny meetings in future to assess and see how things are going. There is clearly some additional bedding in to do with the new scrutiny committees, and because I'm new, I don't have the comparator to work with. So I think it's only fair that I attend the meetings in due course to make an assessment, and also liaise with Anita, who's our principal scrutiny officer, to just check that the recommendations have been fully taken on board and implemented.
If I could come back very briefly.
Yes, Thomas, yeah.
Thank you for that. I didn't realise you hadn't been to a scrutiny meeting. I would have not asked that question had I realised that. I do apologise. I would like, therefore, at some point, us to review what does occur in scrutiny, because I have concerns about the way in which the cabinet member has been particularly become treated at the end of the meeting and the format, and also the simple fact that you have to fill out a form to get something scrutinised. I do think that area needs to be looked at, and just simply see how members feel, how they are finding they are able to contribute, and whether the system works. Largely, I think it does work well. I'm not being negative about it, but I do think that there are areas that need to be addressed that are a concern to people who have participated in scrutiny.
You, Councillor Thomas. I'm going to go to the Council's Chief Scrutiny Officer. Anita, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Thomas. I know we've had some discussions about this. What I would say is that when we talked about the work programme earlier, I talked about this as an annual review of the Overview and Scrutiny Protocol. So that Overview and Scrutiny Protocol is reviewed by the chairs and vice chairs of Scrutiny and Audit informally, and they make recommendations here. So that's an annual process. And as part of the process leading up to this administration, they did make a change to, for example, the report template that cabinet member uses. So the cabinet member template was seen as a little bit perhaps too prescriptive, and as a result of that, there's been an addition made to provide the cabinet member with a bit more ability to elaborate on issues rather than being focused on the scrutiny, the work programme and the scrutiny. So there's a bit more flex in that template. We are talking, the Chief Executive and I are talking to the cabinet members about their role in scrutiny. We will also be doing a separate session with the chairs and vice chairs of scrutiny to support them. Your work programming suggestion template, I know why you're saying it. We do like a form. Democratic Services and the council does like a form. We've got a form for motions. We've got a form for call in. We've got public forms for public participation. The work programming suggestion template was brought in as a result of the scrutiny improvement review, as Councillor Rouse, who led that piece of work, knows. And it was designed to try to support consistency across the 5 committees, which we had previously, which wasn't being observed. And it was also a tool to help members of committees prioritise, because as the monitoring officers referred to, there was examples in previous committees where there were a number of reports to note where there wasn't any actual impact as a result of that work. But rest assured, Councillor Thomas, there is a review process which comes back through this committee, so you will be able to be engaged in that process going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. There is a review process, and I can see it's on our work programme for March 2026. Councillor Parsonage, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, and Paul. And this may already be covered, but please bear with me. You've said that the self-assessment is in draft and it's going to the CEO next week. Is it planned for that self-assessment to come to one of the members' panels at all, or scrutiny committee?
Councillor Parsonage. So I think the question, Paul, there is what councillor involvement will be through the self-assessment.
So the self-assessment is essentially for me to complete and then to check in with the Chief Exec and 151 officer. It also recommends checking in with the leader and appropriate members of cabinet. That's not to say that there's anything in that that I wouldn't be uncomfortable in sharing. So it might well be that, as I've just alluded to, rather than coming back to this committee with another noting report, essentially noting that the self-assessment, it could well be that I share it with chair and vice chair and possibly members of the committee. So I'll think about how appropriate it is to share it at the appropriate time, but it doesn't cause me great difficulty to share essentially what it amounts to, a factual assessment of the structures we've got in place. There is a lot of detail in there, and I would just want to run the rule over it just to make sure what the status is of that document in terms of whether it's going to be sort of confidential just for members rather than to be shared any further than that.
Councillor Parsonage.
Thank you. It's just that one of the things you mentioned was there may be significant changes to boards. So I'm used to something like that as a self-assessment coming forward to something similar to a scrutiny committee would be what I would normally say. But I'll leave that up to discussions later if you're happy.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Councillor Parsonage. Can I suggest, Paul, given the recommendation that we've passed on the last item on the agenda, that perhaps you have a conversation with the chairman and the vice chairman of the committee to deem whether it's appropriate to bring back to committee?
Yes, of course. And just to clarify, when I'm talking about boards, it's those purely officer boards where we're essentially running assurance processes and gateway processes before decisions are passed up to members. So it's not that we would look to change any part of the executive decision-making process, because that without bringing a report through this committee, if that comes out, then clearly we would need to change that, because that would have an effect on the constitution. So just to clarify, we're talking about the focus of the review on the sort of the officer work before something would come through to members, which isn't intended to involve a constitutional change.
Thank you, Monitoring Officer. Councillor Kenny.
Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, and thank you, Paul. Can we change the name? Governance Review is such a umbrella term. In fact, to me, it means changes in the parishes. And after 2 years, the parishes are likely to come back and ask for a governance review of their boundaries. So you've described, I think, 2 or 3 vaguely connected things, but they're really 2 or 3 totally different studies. So can we actually have names that are meaningful so that we know what it is that's been done?
Monitoring officer.
I see the point you're making, and I think governance review can refer to a number of different things. It's being referred to as a governance review across the officer cohort, and I think that when I was asked to do it, undertake that work by the chief executive, it was termed a governance review, and that's also how it's been termed in the audit committee discussion in February. So I'm reluctant to change the name, but I take on board the point. Given that it's unlikely that at this stage that the change, any changes proposed will involve constitutional changes, I think the impact of the title is lesser than what it would be if it was constitutional facing.
Government
Councillor
review
Kenny.
dash officer cohort or whatever. I think it is such an umbrella term that it is meaningless to anybody actually looking at it as what you're actually doing. And yes, you've made a very good explanation of it, but I've already forgotten. So I would like I would like to have something clearer saying, the monitoring officer is looking at.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Kenny. As you know, we've had the community governance review. Perhaps this is an internal governance review. Just one to think about, Paul. Councillor Jenkins, please.
Yeah, thanks for this. I think it's great that we're getting a peer review, and it's great that we're doing the self-assessment, and I think that will be very helpful. Can I just ask, in terms of the things like the scheme of delegation, is it just going to look at money, or is it going to look at wider decision making? Because one of the things that I find quite strange is that quite often at, say, a scrutiny committee, the officer that's presenting is not the one that's actually doing the work. They're more strategic, but actually, from my perspective, having somebody there who's involved in the operational delivery, I think is really useful to understand. So in terms of delegation and autonomy, and at what level an officer is considered appropriate to talk to members about something that they're doing, I think that would be worth looking at a bit.
Monitoring officer.
Thank you, Councillor Jenkins. Yeah. So in terms of the work that I'm undertaking, it's not going to specifically look at scheme of delegation, but at the same time, I've noted your point, and it might well be that if we are looking at the wider context of officer decision making itself in the executive sense, we would then be thinking about, is there a change to the scheme of delegation or other rules in the Constitution? And then at that point, we'd have to come back to Constitution and governance for a discussion around what those changes are. So I'll take your point on board, and we'll see whether we actually get into that as part of the governance review. Thank you.
Come back. I think
Jenkins.
the decision making, quite often members can be wrong-footed because decision making has been made by officers without the members actually being involved, but members sometimes then get the comeback on that. So the person making the decision on something should be able to be scrutinised on that decision, I think.
Should I come back in?
Yes, please, monitoring officer.
Yeah, so I agree, and actually I think one of my observations would be that was part of the discussion at the audit committee in relation to the contract that was being audited in February, that member involvement, member knowledge of that decision making wasn't where it needed to be. So I take your point, Councillor Jenkins, and as in my role as monitoring officer, I do have as a sort of a wider sight, one eye on whether we've got that balance right. Some of that is for discussion and I suppose leadership of the executive, because some of the officer decision making will be as a result of where the cabinet member decision making is. So there's an element of that needs to be led through, and as the report says, any changes to the executive decision making arrangements would be within the gift of the leader. But there is obviously then a flow through into officer decision making as a result of that. So I'll definitely keep that under review, and we'll see how we go. But I certainly don't want it to feel like officers are making decisions and members are being blindsided.
Yeah.
Councillor O'Connor.
Yes, thank you. First of all, congratulations, Mr. Deputy Vice Chair. I have a question on the officer governance review element of that. Paul, thank you very much for the presentation. You mentioned that there are assurances in gateway processes, and just following on from Councillor Jenkins' question on a little bit more transparency on what those consist of, and for the assurances and gateway process. I understand why they're there. As a new member, perhaps you could help me understand those a little further in terms of the compliance aspects of those, and also to what standards they're being held. Thank you.
Thank you. Monitoring officer.
So I think it's important to note that as part of the context for the work, as I've said, is the fact that I'm relatively new to the council, and I'm trying to understand the various different boards and structures that we have, even within the officer cohort. To some extent, the member decision making structure is easier to understand, particularly for a newcomer, because it's similar to what you find at other councils. Part of the work that Emma and I have been actually trying to nail down is how many officer decision making, or sorry, I shouldn't even call them decision making, I'm falling into my own trap and I correct people on saying that decision making. How many officer assurance boards do we have before we can then work out whether they're necessary and whether terms of reference cross over, and whether we've got duplication as opposed to just some sort of overlap which might be necessary. So we're trying to actually in the first part of the work, it's essentially a discovery phase to work out what we've got and how it all interlinks with officer decision making. At this stage, I can't give you the full readout and the details, and we've got so much work going on across the council in different departments in relation to so many different services. There's just such a huge array of all that work going on. But I think my initial impression is that we've got a very diligent workforce, and we've got very diligent approaches to ensuring that decisions that we eventually take through members are compliant with the law and the regulatory frameworks that they need to be. And that's how this sort of system of officer boards works. Essentially, it's assurance at different levels to make sure that ideas and the way in which we put policy into operation has been tested, so that when you finally present a report to cabinet member or committee, there is a sort of a process that's happened beforehand to ensure that you've actually complied with the law. So I'm not able really to answer your question directly there, Councillor O'Connor, but at the same time, you'll appreciate that there is that period of discovery where we're trying to work out which board does what, and whether we have more than what we require. I'd be surprised if the work turns out we don't have enough and we need to put more in place.
Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you, Paul. I do understand where you're coming from, and obviously, as starting afresh with fresh eyes on this one. I have a request on the discovery phase of your activities. going around scoping out the officer questions about gateway process and assurances. Would it be possible for officers to keep us updated on the discovery phase of your explorations, please?
Monitoring officer.
Yes, I don't see why not. I'm happy that we can do that. And as I said before, that could potentially be informally rather than needing to come back to the committee with a further noting paper. But leave that one with me, and we'll see how best to keep you informed.
Thank you, Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Great, thank you. Any further comments, members? Excellent. So on page 19 of your papers, members, we have one recommendation. Can I please have a proposer? Councillor Kenny, do we have a seconder? Councillor Candy, all those in favour, please, members. It's unanimous again. Thank you, members. There being no item number 8, any other business that the chairman considers to be of urgency, I have no other business today, so therefore I will close the meeting at 10:58. Thank you, members.
Thank you. Bye all.
Thanks, Paul.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Your microphone as well.
Yeah, that's what I need to do. I think I don't know how I got that. I don't know how I got that screen, but I was obviously getting double at one point.
Well done.
All right.
Saved us. Where is it you're from, Weybridge, is it? No, Lonston.
Last.